Good morning and welcome to our webinar on the index to the Colonial Secretary's letters received. My name is Emily Hannah and I'm coming to you from Kingswood on the land of the Darug people, and I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I pay my respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So the Colonial Secretary's Office, a lot of you would be familiar to some extent or other with the Colonial Secretary's Office. This office basically existed as the channel of communications between the Governor, other government officers and private settlers, especially before 1856. So it was really central to the operation of the colonial government in the 19th century. And so much of the business of New South Wales through the 19th century operated through this office of the Colonial Secretary. So there's a good chance that any contact that your ancestor had with the colonial government may have been through the Colonial Secretary's office. So the records are really important for family historians. And you'll find correspondence about all the matters that are listed on the screen here, everything from convicts and immigration matters, correspondence about children going in and out of the orphan schools, letters about quarantine, vaccination, lunatic asylums, the hospitals, the charitable institutions, the female factory, applications to bury people, correspondence about Aboriginal people, correspondence about the military, the postal service, the police, jails and penal establishments, remission and execution of sentences. There will be correspondence from localities and about localities and bylaws for localities, and also public education institutions as well. So not limited to these things, but certainly including these things. So you can see just from that list, it's kind of like all aspects of life in the colony at the time. Now, the records that we've got include 5,585 boxes of letters received by the office between 1826 and 1982. So in other words, a lot. We've got 47 separate series of letters being sent out by the office. So this is where the office has made copies of letters before they've posted them to their various correspondents. We have indexes and registers which allowed the office to keep track of what had come in and what they'd put into their 5,585 boxes there. We have 2,128 special bundles. So these are files on just a particular subject, and they've been just where all the paperwork on that topic's been bundled together specially. And we also have a lot of reports that were made to and by the Colonial Secretary's office. So a huge quantity of material. Now, Joan Rees, who is pictured here in the early 1990s, 1992, Joan started making a list of the convicts in the main series of letters received from 1826 onwards. So imagine we had the 1788 to 1825 index, but not really anything after 1825. So Joan started making this list for her own personal use until fellow researchers convinced her to publish the index. And for years after that, Joan spent one day a week, every single week, in our reading room at Kingswood, compiling her index. And you've got to remember this is in the days before there was any significant technology such as laptops. So Joan would spend her time going through box after box of correspondence and handwriting the index entries as we've got pictured here. Now, over time, the index grew, and it was initially published as 11 sets of microfiche, and Joan's daughter, Linda Bowman, continued this indexing work after Joan passed in 2009. Now, Aileen Trinder, who a lot of you will know of, she's well known the world over for her indexing of immigration records. Aileen carried on Joan and Linda's work. She edited and then published 2 editions of this index, that Joan had started in electronic format. And so you might be familiar with searching the index this way. And on the screen there, you can just see the search screen for the Joan Rees Index as it became when it was published by Aileen in that electronic format. So now the index spans 1826 to 1896. And Joan's work is deeply valued and appreciated by researchers around the country. So the index is not complete, but Joan never intended it to be, but it's a fine point of entry to the most valuable area of the State Archives collection. And now we're so pleased to bring this index to you via our website. So I thought we'd have a look first at just how to find the index on the website. And what you can see here is the MHNSW, Museums of History New South Wales homepage. So if you click on the search button, which is in the top right-hand corner there, or if you click on collections, which is written there in the middle up the top, or if you go to menu, which is on the right-hand side, and then click on collections, you will be on your way to finding the index. So in this search, I've just gone to search in the top right-hand corner there, and that takes me to a screen like this. And in this instance, I can choose either to go straight to the catalogue or I can go straight to our online indexes, and I'm going to do that second thing, which I've circled, to go straight to the online indexes. So this takes me to our subject A to Z. Now this you might remember from our older website where we had research A to Z. It's very similar. So everything's just arranged alphabetically by research topics. And you've got the ability now to filter to just look at guides or indexes or articles or webinars. So I'm going to go straight to C first for Colonial Secretary. And once I'm there, I'm going to click on the indexes jelly bean. And yes, jelly bean is the technical term, and filter down just so I can only see the indexes for the Colonial Secretary. And luckily for me, the Colonial Secretary Letters Received Index 1826 to 96 is the first cab off the rank there, that first index. So I'm going to click on that as my next option. So it takes me straight to the index page. It's a different look. This time we've got the indexy bit at the top, and then at the bottom of this same screen, there's more information about the index. So you can see there on the right-hand side, just above the dark purple line, there's a link that says learn more about this index. So if I click on that, it'll just take me to the bottom of that screen, and I can see some headings there about the index, ordering copies, searching index, and the acknowledgement, which will tell you more about the index and what's happening. If I'm thinking about what abbreviations might pop up in the index, or if I'm wanting to work out what an abbreviation is, if I click on searching the index, my list of abbreviations used in the index will come up. And here's just a list of common abbreviations that are included in the index, just to help you when you're using it to work out what it might be that it's talking to. So everything from Captain to Western Australia, Roman Catholic, New Zealand Regiment, and so on, all there. So you can come here at any time just to work out what the abbreviations are. So if I scroll back up the top to the actual index, just that first part that you see when you open the index up, I can see also there's a search box on my top right-hand side. And what I've done is just started an example here, searching for the words George Gordon. So searching for a name, George Gordon. And I can see there's a lot of different George Gordons coming up with descriptions like Paddington, Malabar, Hive, America, Windsor, age 4, wife of Mary Gordon, wife of George, and so on and so forth. So I might want to narrow down my search. I can see there's 14 results there, so that's nice, but maybe I want to look for a particular George Gordon and just to narrow my search. So I can do that just by adding more words to the search bar up the top there and clicking on search again. So I've just added the word Malabar and narrowed my search to now it's only one hit, which is fantastic. So the index tells you a little bit of stuff here. We've got the first name and the surname of our person. In that first column, it might also give you a subject if it's a subject rather than a name. So here we've got George Gordon. Description is Malabar. So it's a ship, a convict ship and a year, but it could equally end up being some other kind of identifying information. So it could be the age of a person, or it could be some other identifying information that will tell you where that person was at the time that their letter was written, if there might not be information about the name of the ship that they came on. In the citation column, this is where we get the information to tell us where to look for the original letter. So I've got a box number in the square brackets. That's that / number. That's a box number. And then I've got a letter number, 37/11,004. So the year 37, that's the year 1837, the year that the letter was received. And it was the 11,004th letter that came into the office in that year. So every year they'd start at number 1 and they'd write up every single letter, who it came from, what it was about, the date they received it, what they did with it. And so every single letter has its own special number. And then the date, we've got 1837. Finally, the details column there on the very last column, details, that's the link I click on to be taken to the entry in our catalogue, like so. So I've clicked on detail, ended up in the catalogue, and there I see that same entry, just in a slightly different looking format. But here is useful because here I can request this for the reading room if I'm coming into Kingswood to view the record, or I can order a copy of it by clicking on the buy link there. So I can do either of those things. So if I'm ordering a copy, it's a copy that I'm paying a fee for, and then that copy will be copied and emailed to me. If I want to come into the reading room, I click on the request button and make my request. The only thing you need to do for your request is you also need a reader's ticket, which you can apply for online, and you need that reader's ticket before you can make that request. You need to know the day that you're coming to the reading room, and then once you know those 2 bits of information, then you can request that letter for the reading room visit. Now, if I wanted to look at the actual letter itself, this is she or he. So this is the letter. You can see the letter number up in the top corner there, the left-hand side, 37/11,004. And what this is a letter from George Gordon, who arrived as a convict on the Malabar in 1819 for highway robbery, sentenced to transportation for life, arriving in New South Wales in 1819. By 1830, he's got a ticket of leave, and he's now wanting a little bit later in 1837 to get a conditional pardon. He's got some people who've also attested to his character, so that's the signatures in the different handwriting and the different handwriting on that second page there. And then on the third page there, we've got some comments that were made about this letter by the Colonial Secretary's office once it's been received. So if we take a closer look at that, and I would always say to you, always read the annotations if there are any, because these will tell you about the outcome of the application or the petition. In this case, it was a flat no. So in the red, there's basically a summary of the letter saying the basic facts there. He's come out on the Malabar, he got a ticket of leave in 1830, still holds his ticket, and now he musters regularly. And then the messy handwriting down the bottom, which took me about 2 days to work out what it meant, and I finally figured it out this morning, and it says, no, not sufficiently recommended by persons who have known the petitioner. So George Gordon, from checking the online indexes to our conditional pardons, doesn't seem to have ever actually received his conditional pardon. Poor George. Now, moving on to a different search, This index started out as a convicts index, but has expanded to include other people. So not just convicts, other people as well. As I said before, Joan always identified people where she could, and so did Aileen and Linda, and they would use a ship name or some other identifying remarks if the information was available. So you can see for this search on the name John O'Brien that there are a lot of people not identifying as convicts, and as the 19th century wore on, convict status was less and less relevant or common. So some of the things you can see here are dead, Jael Darlinghurst, son of Jeremiah, Jael Berrimer, Windsor, and so on, age 3, Roman Catholic orphan school. Now, there's also 2 mentions of a John O'Brien who was identified with ship names in 1891. So if you look at the citation column there, that column with the box number and the letter number, you can see that the citations are the same for both entries. So guessing this is probably the same person. So we've got Cutty Sark crew, we've got Salvatore to USA. Aha, so we've got some kind of letter about someone who was a crew member on a ship, potentially, or 2 ships even. So what you've got there is a cross-reference, really, or 2 entries for the same document. And you can see that the reason for the 2 entries is the 2 different descriptions in this case. So if we go and have a look at this actual letter, this one was quite cool, I thought. So this is a letter from Kate O'Brien in London, and she's writing in 1891 to find out about the whereabouts of her husband, John O'Brien, who was a steward on board the Cutty Sark. She left Sydney for England in December, but it doesn't seem that her husband was on the ship. There'd been some issues or misunderstandings between the captain and her husband, and he was discharged. But she hasn't heard from her husband since October, and she's worried that something's happened. So she's written to the Colonial Secretary to find out what was going on. And attached to that letter is a letter from the police station at Newcastle, where they've actually been sent off to try and find out what happened to him. And it turns out that John was then employed on the Salvatore, another ship, as the cook and steward on that ship. And this ship was going to San Francisco. And from there, having spoken to John O'Brien, the senior constable has found out that from San Francisco, John intended to try and find another ship back to London. So the constable's actually shown the wife's letter to John. John's confirmed that that was the handwriting of his wife, and they've been able to report back to the Colonial Secretary, who could then report that back to Mrs. O'Brien. So happy days. And even more cutely, I've found a photo of the front of the Cutty Sark there in our digitised photographs. So I've just popped that in just for fun. If we go back to the index and I did a search, say, for O'Brien and that letter number, I can see that there's also an entry under the name Kate O'Brien for that same letter. So 1 letter, 3 entries, and they've got her as described as London, UK. So all of those descriptions now make perfect sense now that we know what the letter's about, and we can see it also makes perfect sense to have all 3 of those there, because you might look for any 3 options when you're looking for those people. So the only thing that you don't see is the details of any of the officials who were involved. So we don't see the police at Newcastle, we don't see the name of the Colonial Secretary or any of that, but we do see John and Kate O'Brien as the primary people that the letter was about. Now, just to think of a few different ways to search the index. So obviously names and spelling variations, so important in the 19th century, because spelling was not like it is today. It was more of a intuitive thing, perhaps, rather than something that was prescribed and had to be the same all the time, sadly for us. And what they did do was, Joan and Linda and Aileen, was they would use the spelling as it appeared on the letter that they were indexing at the time. Sometimes too, you've got to take into account that letters could be very difficult to read because some of the handwriting was appalling. So they've had to try and make judgments on particular letters, and some letters are harder to judge than others, so that can sometimes lead to issues. You could also try searching by place name or a ship name. You could try keywords like report, petition, memorial, inhabitants. You could also think about subjects, so things like female factory, asylum, orphan, jail, for example. Or you could just browse using the keyword subject, which is what this example here is on the right-hand side. So I've just put subject into the search and you can see the range of different things that pop up there. Huge quantity of things, even just with that 10, 12 entries there. Here I've narrowed down a search to just inhabitants Mudgee, and you can see again there's quite a few different letters there relating to Mudgee. A lot of them are memorials, so it's where a group of people in Mudgee have gotten together and written to the Colonial Secretary. What you would find, however, is that a lot of these letters of inhabitants of a particular locality won't be listed individually by name. They'll just be captured under the inhabitants Mudgee, inhabitants Windsor, wherever it might be. So if you know someone was living in a particular area at a particular time, this might be another way to approach the index. So when I pick on one of these options, and this time I've picked on one in the middle there just called Memorial of Inhabitants from 1839. Here we've got the letter. I apologise, it's not very easy to read this one, but what it says is that we, the undersigned landholders and proprietors of stock, resident and occupying land in the district of Mudgee, beg most respectfully to your Excellency the very great danger to both ourselves and families and also our property arising from the great and increasing number of desperate bushrangers, both runaway convicts and free persons, now and recently committing daring robberies by day and night. And although we are fully aware that your Excellency's mind has of late been fully and anxiously occupied in the continuing and setting forth such means as are within your power to extend a police force to this district, we still feel it our duty to represent in the most urgent and forcible manner to your Excellency our conviction from actual observance that those characters are rapidly and alarmingly increasing of number, and all of late with proper officers to be stationed for present one party at or near Cherry Tree Hill on the Mudgee and Dubby Road, and other detachments at Mudgee and Dubby, which would be a very great assistance to the horse police force in securing and escorting them after they are apprehended. And there's no full stops in any of this. And also to assist in their apprehension and suppression until a regular police force can be established for the district. Blah, 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 blah. And we have the outcome of the application written on the back of the final sheet of paper, always diagonally for some reason. And the Colonial Secretary's response is that the gentleman must be informed that I regret very much it is quite out of my power to meet the numerous demands which are made upon me for additional police establishment throughout the country. The bushrangers and depredators complained of must be for the most part the assigned servants of persons in the district, and it appears to me that the only means of putting a stop to their careless proceedings must be looked for in the constant vigilance and exertions of their assignees or of the magistrates and landholders of the districts. The only effectual way in which the government can be of assistance is by withdrawing the assigned servants altogether from this or any other district in which depredations cannot be checked by ordinary police or the exertions of the free inhabitants. So, ouch. And then at the bottom of the middle page there, you can see all the signatures of all the different petitioners. So none of those people are included in the index linked to this particular letter. So to have found this letter and to find out what was happening in Mudgee in 1839 regarding this, which must have been a very stressful time and probably quite scary, is to go in looking for Mudgee and then for the date range that these people were writing the letter. But it gives you a bit of an insight and a picture as to some of the circumstances that people were living with at the time. So it's quite interesting in that sense. Now, another way you can search the index is by the use of wildcards. So with a lot of our searching these days on our website anyway, a question mark can represent one character. So if I do T question mark MEY, then that question mark can be replaced by any letter like an A or an O or whatever. So we can see that there is one for Tommy R. Hop, who was a Chinese person at Mittagong, and so we can pick up his letter. If I use an asterisk or a star, that will represent more than one character. And so in the second example down, you see I've put the star in the T and then the MEY with the star in the middle. And that has often substituted for two letters. So either the TOO or the TWO, Toomey or Twomey. And I would expect that Tommy R. Hop would also show up in that particular search as well. So useful when spelling variations were common is to substitute with either a question mark for one or an asterisk for more than one character there. Another thing you might do is maybe do a search by a ship name. So thinking of all those convict ships that came out and all the other immigration ships that came out throughout the 19th century. And that was a particular way that a lot of people identified themselves, and they're also identified in the indexes. You can see there up the top, there are some general letters and things, lists of people on board the convicts, on board the Minerva, 1838. So we've got signatures of cabin passengers and a memorial of the passengers, a sick list of the passengers, and so on. And then down the bottom of that list, we've got the beginning of individuals who were associated with various voyages of the Minerva, including up to 594 results there. Amazing. So what I can do is I can stretch out the number of entries that will show on one screen up to 500. So I can do that up the top on the right-hand side there, and I've done that in this instance. And then on the left-hand side, I've got a few options as well. So I can export this data that shows up on this particular screen either into a PDF or an Excel or a CSV format, or I can print. What I like to do sometimes is to export into Excel or CSV. It will only export what's on this particular page. So 594 entries, I can export 500. Then I can go to page 2 and export the rest and amalgamate them manually all into one Excel spreadsheet. So I've done that here. I've popped it all into a spreadsheet and I've sorted by the surname. Happy days. And then from there, I've got my details, including my description. I've got my letter numbers. I've got my dates. So I could sort by date if I wanted to do that. I could sort by citation. That might be useful just to see, the numbers of people or how many people might be on a particular list. And then at the far column, I've got the link to get into the catalogue. The other thing I could do is do a search on, say, some of those people, or do that whole search in the catalogue. So if I went for Anne Fields, say, the Minerva aged 8, or if I went for Catherine Fields, Minerva, I could then just put that search name into the catalogue search box like so. So this is just another way to find these entries in the catalogue. So I've put Anne Field, I've put a star, so I'll get Annabelle, I'll get Anne with an E, Anne without an E. And then what I can do is I can filter just to look at entries in the Colonial Secretary's index if I want to do that. And so I've circled that index title over on the right-hand side there. You can see I've circled index to Colonial Secretary's letters received. If I click on that, it will show me just the entries from the index that have those names. So I've got 2 entries for Anne Fields, And what's particularly interesting about this is one of these has been digitised. So that's the one with the PDF icon there. So this index is offered as part of our copy order service, and when we're copying the entries, we're also uploading those to our catalogue, and you will see some of these entries just starting to pop up. Bear in mind we have over 205,000 entries in the index, and at the moment I think we're sitting at about 987 things that have been digitised. So we've got a long way to go. But anyway, looking at Anne Fields there, if I click to open that entry, I can then click to view the PDF, and then on the right side you can see how that document would show in the PDF viewer there. And then if I blow it up fully, it's a letter from the convict ship Minerva. They're looking for all the particulars they could obtain respecting the wives and families of convicts now in New South Wales, sent out at the expense of the government. And then on the right-hand side there, we've got the children belonging to female convicts embarked on board the ship Minerva. And there we see Anne Fields down the bottom. She's aged 8. She's a daughter of Catherine Fields, and they are from County Moynihan in Ireland. So happy days. It's really nice to see it all there, all in the one place. But as I said, it's going to be a long time before all 205,000 entries are digitised and uploaded to the catalogue. It's work in progress. Now, what would you do if you couldn't find what you were looking for in this particular index? Where would you go next? Well, you'd probably be up for a visit to Kingswood, I think. You'd be having to go back to check the original indexes and registers to letters received that were created at the time in the office by the Colonial Secretary's clerks. So every letter that came in would be listed in a register like this one. So this is from 1855, and you can see the numbers going down the page, and then across the page there'd be columns, and they'd write up who the letter came from, the date it came in, what the letter was about, and what they did with it. So did they file it under the number it had, or did they file it under a different number? So you'd be going back to the original indexes that they used at the time, then these registers, fingers crossed that you'd find a reference to what you're looking for, and then that letter would be in the box. That'd be the process. The other thought would be, is the matter that you're researching big enough, important enough in government time, in the time, to have turned into a special bundle? And if it had been, then you could search the catalogue for the special bundles for those topics. And the topics range from bundles about murder cases to land resumption to returns of people in irons, all sorts of things, or returns of irons handed out to jails to lock people up in, and how many numbers were given, that kind of thing. So all sorts of stuff ends up in the special bundles, so that might be something to check as well. But that would be what you'd need to do if you couldn't find something that you knew should be there but you couldn't find in the Joan Rees index. Now, there are some limitations to this index. As I said before, and as we've seen, there might be lists that contain many names, but the names aren't indexed individually, but they might just be shown under a generic name like Mudgee Inhabitants or Memorial Inhabitants Pit Town, something like that. There were a lot of letters between 1838 and 1842 that were fragile and were not indexed. Early on, when Joan was starting this index, she gave priority to convict names and free persons who weren't recorded in the original indexes and registers. So there might be people who were recorded in the original indexes that are not in this index because they were recorded that other way. Joan Rees also published another index called the Index to Convict Marriage Banns, 1828, 26 to 42, which were returns or lists sent in by various clergy for lists of convicts that they were marrying and paperwork that might prove that they were currently single. So those are not included in this particular index. And it's not a complete list. It was never intended to be a complete list of all the material in this series of letters received. So if you can't find anything, as I just said on the previous slide, check the original indexes and registers to the correspondence for more. And finally, I just want to leave you with this picture of the camels on their way to the far west in 1910. And this is really just to highlight that the index covers an incredibly informative, diverse and useful collection of records. I've just done a little search on camel there, and we've got everything from letters about Burke's camel in the 1860s to a couple of letters about camel trains in the 1890s. So just take camels with you as you go into the time after this webinar. If you're searching the index is easy to search. You can read the entries easily, and you can export data to manipulate it. Hooray! If you're searching the index in the catalogue, that's where you might want to request records for the reading room from this index and order copies for a fee to have them sent to you. And you can view the few digitised copies that are included via the catalogue. And you can also see entries for your keyword from other indexes and item lists. So that can be useful. So if you're searching a convict and you just put that convict's name into the catalogue, the name will come up across everything that's listed in the catalogue. And then you can filter to your selected search. And search tips. So try spelling variations. Try a few different approaches. So what else do you know about the person? Did they live in Mudgee? Were they in the female factory? What ship did they come out on? That kind of thing. And just remember that there's a lot of generic documents in there not listed by the names showing on that document, but just something more general. So list of people on a ship, list of people from a particular area, and that might be relevant to your topic as well. So this draws to the end our webinar today, and I wish you the greatest luck and happy hunting with the index to the Colonial Secretary's correspondence 1826 to 1896.